that is what I like about Dhruv Rathi, that he may be the youngest of that group. Problem is the main message itself. If it's constantly hate message, rural men in their 30s who cannot marry because they don't have a job. This has apparently been studied and written about. So for me, it is an excellent example that even people who are not 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds or 25, but they may be 30 or 35.
Hello, Federal viewers. Welcome to the chat with Professor Arjun Appadurai. Professor, you mentioned in your predictions that the religious agendas have a limiting reach in country like India, which is rooted in locality and caste. And this seems to be very true in case of Ayodhya Ram Temple, event. I think the BJP performed very poorly in Ayodhya. And can you explain why this gala inauguration of this Ram temple did not work out in favor of BJP?
I think there are two things. One is that in Uttar Pradesh, I think the contrast is extremely stark between the Hindutva mobilization message and the ground realities of jobs, employment, violence against Dalits, exclusion from all kinds of things. In other words, the gap is too great. So I think up to a point, people were willing to listen to Hindutva message, but now the gap is too big between that message and reality. Let's call it rights, justice, jobs, entitlements on the ground. That is one factor. The other factor is at the end, you see, religion too is a local affair. So if you go to, deep in Tirunelveli, let's say, to somewhere in Ramnad and talk a lot about Ram or Sita, it may not work very well because there may be people worshipping other gods from Murugan down to village deities, etc. So people forget that religion is not just a national or mass affair. And this whole Hindutva effort to weaponize Hinduism has been to nationalize something which is itself always local. And if you look at the long history of India, all the so called Hindu groups, because that term itself is a late term, are from this sect, that sect, Madhavas, Gosains, Gorakhpuris, this thing, that thing. But who put them into one big lump? That is a very recent thing. So that is a second factor, failing to recognize that religion in the form of weaponized Hinduism cannot be taken straight from locality up to business class in Delhi and just
Okay.
put out there. So that is my two answers to why. There are, of course, other factors about people being displaced by the temple, feeling like they are second class in Ayodhya itself where they live. There are other things, but these are the bigger factors, I would say.
Professor, Modi's charisma seems to be diminishing these days, and he made several visits to the southern states, but despite all these visits, he could not make much mark.
So, in his visits, in his effort to move into the south, from one point of view, you could say BJP has done a bit better than in the past. So at least Karnataka and Andhra are showing some inroads. Tamil Nadu and Kerala clearly not. But still, compared to North Indian based parties, BJP has crept in a little bit. Even the heavy competition with Mamata in Bengal is got to be noticed. Having said that, I would say it is noteworthy that both Andhra and Karnataka are closer to the north in various ways, whereas Tamil Nadu and Kerala are, let's say, hardcore Dravidian areas. And honestly, there are two issues there. One is that in the end, Modi looks like a North Indian. He talks like a North Indian, he looks like a North Indian, he behaves like a North Indian. So even bringing Sengol and this and that is not enough to get over the fact that for 100 years, the ruling authorities, elites, castes, as well as the lower groups have regarded light skinned people from the north with some suspicion, regardless of where they go or where they do worship and whether they go to Kanyakumari, that's all fine. But they don't easily buy in to that charisma. So that is one problem. The other problem with charisma is something which is not a renewable source of energy, if I may borrow a metaphor. You have to keep pumping it up.
BJP held special meetings with the social media influencers. They had a lot of strategies with the social media. They had exclusive WhatsApp groups. They
Right.
worked.
So in the last 10 years, anybody would have to admit that the BJP IT trolls had a lot of success. So the question again you have to ask is, why is that success not permanent, like rising and rising and rising? Like charisma, people after a while get a bit fed up. And the trouble is, what they get fed up, which is not social media. People are doing purchasing, people are using Paytm, people are, as you know, in Tamil Nadu, rickshaw drivers are using QR codes. They have no problem with all that. Problem is the main message itself. If it's constantly hate message or Modi's great message or Modi's Paramatma message, they're not interested afterwards. So I think the failure is not of the means of communication, but with the message. The message has worn out.
What about your thoughts on the YouTuber Dhruv Rathi?
Yeah, I know him a little bit less than I know people like Ravish Kumar, etc. He's younger, he's newer, and as several people have pointed out, he has moved from being a kind of frivolous, playful character to a very serious analyst. And when I watched him, he's very convincing, but I don't know him well enough, except to say he's clearly one of a whole generation of voices that go from Kanaya Kumar to people like him, and then older people like Ravish Kumar, and then wise people like Yogendra Yadav, this, that, all of whom are listening without being paid instruments of some party or something. They are actually trying to listen. And that is what I like about Dhruv Rathi, that he may be the youngest of that group.
Fine, Rosa. The other important question. Last year, there was a survey from the Open Society Foundation. They predicted, they got the sense of, the idea that the young people these days, they have. Many of them, they are having a doubt about the merits of democracy. Is this a bad news for a democratic country like India?
So I think maybe there is some truth to this. I wrote an essay 5 years ago when Donald Trump was rising. I said we can explain the global swing to the right partly by something I call democracy fatigue. People are fed up that it's slow, that there is too much discussion, argument, and debate. Deliver the results. So when somebody says, I'll deliver tomorrow, they tend to go that way. But these elections in India are actually showing that a significant number of people in the electorate, I think some 600 million voted, but let's say safely some 200 million of them, you could say, based on seat by seat numbers, party numbers, etc., have pushed back. Now, why they have pushed back, everybody has suddenly become an expert today because they've all said something else 3 days ago. And now they're all explaining why electorate is sending this message, that message. My feeling is there are two things involved. One is the youth factor, where people are in fact, fed up, but not with democracy as a whole. They are fed up with lousy delivery on rights, justice, jobs, inclusion. And it is completely natural that the youth who are fed up are overwhelmingly from subaltern castes, Dalits or others. I have recently read something sent by a friend of mine that says in Maharashtra, there is any number of rural men in their 30s who cannot marry because they don't have a job. This has apparently been studied and written about. So, for me, it is an excellent example that even people who are not 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds or 25, but they may be 30 or 35, are experiencing radical economic difficulty. And in many cases, they are also people experiencing exclusion, violence, humiliation, namely on caste grounds. But even when they are above that, let's say they are Marathas, if there is no jobs and they are young, their future looks bankrupt. So I think in the Indian case, these elections are showing us that the exclusion, let's say, particularly of youth from the economy, because after all, they have a life ahead. If their father is jobless, he's already 60, he may have given up, or 70. But if they are 20, 25, 30, the exclusion of youth from economic benefits and even hope is combining with the long term humiliation of lower castes. So when that two demographics meet, this election is saying those are the people speaking. Rahul Gandhi said as much after the results came out. He said, look, we owe this to the young, the poor, and the excluded. He was talking about UP, but you could generalize that. He understood the point that it was not some tactical miracle or some charisma factor for him or Kharge or anybody else, that it was people, the poor, were holding the constitution in their hands and holding it not because of abstract high level elite issues, but because constitution meant to them some basic guarantees. And those were being not delivered. And after 10 years, how long can you wait? So they're also fed up, but they're not fed up of democracy. They're fed up of Modi.